Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to Harriet Mann, to Rabbi Rudin Luria, to Shani Kadis, and to Rami Sibo for filming. I didn't expect to be back here virtually again, but it's a great treat to be part of this celebration. Moshe was clearly the greatest leader in Jewish history, the history of our people. While he's not mentioned in the Haggadah, he was chosen by God to lead us out of slavery in Egypt and to personally receive the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, which of course we celebrate on Shavuot. He then kept our people together through 40 years in the desert and brought us to the brink of entrance into the Promised Land. Just look at a map. If our people had walked directly from Egypt to Israel, how long do you think it would have taken? Even accounting for the fact that a group that large, including lots of children and old people, would move very slowly, it wouldn't have taken very long. An average person can walk a mile in about 20 minutes. Let's double that to 40 minutes because of the old and the young. In a little over 6.5 hours of walking, they would have traveled about 10 miles. At that rate, it would take less than a month to get to Israel. Of course, the former slaves wandered around and around for 40 years. Imagining a road trip with your kids. Mom, Dad, are we there yet? Everyone could see they weren't really getting anywhere, and I'm sure it would have gone over really well had Moshe let everyone know that after the golden calf, God had decreed that anyone who was an adult when the slaves left Egypt needed to die off before the people could enter the Promised Land. This was a Herculean feat to keep everyone together. The text is replete with kvetching, complaining, and rebellion. So what was it that made Moshe such a great leader? And in particular, what did God see in him that justified this confidence? As you know, the Torah is a very sparse text. It's not like a novel where the author clues us in as to what all the main characters are thinking. Remember, it was passed down orally for hundreds of years before it was written down, so some details may have been lost. That's why we read it over and over, cover to cover, and study it so carefully. Each time we see something new. There are just a few short stories in the text of Parsha Shemot about Moshe as an adult that gives us an insight into what God saw in him. And I would like to discuss them now. And I want to suggest that it is these qualities that ideally we look for in any leader, whether we're choosing a leader for a business, a nonprofit, a city, a state, or our country. Let's start with 3 short stories in Exodus 2, verses 11 to 17. This is our first encounter with Moshe as an adult, and I'm fairly low-tech, and again, these texts are all very familiar, so I'm just going to read them. And it came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown up, that he went out unto his brethren, and looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren. And he looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he smote the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. All right, we all know this text. What does it say about Moses? Obviously, he has empathy and moral sensitivity. He's been raised in the palace with privilege as a prince of Egypt, yet he empathizes with the downtrodden slave, someone he doesn't know at all. He has an innate sense of fairness and justice, and he can put himself in someone else's shoes, all important leadership qualities. I believe the key verse is, and he looked this way and that, and when he saw there was no man, then he acted. Why does Moshe look around before he acts? And what does it say about his leadership qualities? The most common explanation is that Moses is cautious. He looks around to see if anyone is watching, as he's fearful of getting caught should he strike the Egyptian. Caution is, of course, an important quality for a good leader. But there may be another reason why Moshe looks around. He wants to see if someone else will come to the aid of the Hebrew slave. When he sees there is nobody at all but himself, and that if he doesn't act, the Egyptian might beat that slave to death, he acts. Moses has the courage to act alone, should it be absolutely necessary, another virtue of leadership. Then we go on to verses 13 and 14. And he went out the second day, and behold, 2 men of the Hebrews were striving together. And he said to him that did the wrong, Wherefore smitest thou thy fellow? And he said, Who made thee a ruler and a judge over us, thinking thou to kill me, as thou didst kill the Egyptian? And Moses feared and said, Surely the thing is known. Again, Moses shows his innate sense of fairness. He doesn't know these 2 men at all, yet he intervenes when he sees one beating the other. And he's able to absorb the taunt of the bully who resents his intervention. God can see that Moses understands that imposing justice is not the way to win a popularity contest. And so we continue. When Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses, but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. All right, again, we see that Moses has the courage to act to avert injustice. He doesn't know any of these women at all. He sees them, he sees the shepherds come, they've worked hard to pull this water, and they drive the women off. He intervenes. He's obviously a man of physical strength. Not only could he overcome and ultimately kill a single Egyptian taskmaster, here he shows he can drive away a group of men who tried to take the water that the women had labored so hard to draw. Now we come to the well-known story of the burning bush. You all know the story, but I want to read a few lines from chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Now Moses was keeping the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the farthest end of the wilderness, and came to the mountain of God, unto Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside now, and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush, and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Hineni. And he said, Draw not nigh hither, put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. To me, the key text is Moses turning aside, and then God observing that Moses has turned aside to observe. What does this show about Moshe? He's intellectually curious. He sees something out of the ordinary, something that doesn't make sense, a burning bush that is not consumed by fire, but keeps burning. A lot of people might not have noticed this. There might have been other people who walked by that bush and just ignored it. But Moses does notice it, and he stops, and he turns aside. He reflects. He tries to figure out what is happening. And it is only when God notices that Moshe stops and turns aside that God knows he has the right man to lead the people out of slavery. And again, the text says, when God sees that Moses stopped and turned aside, then God speaks to him, identifies himself, tells him that he's choosing Moses to lead the people out of slavery. And now we come to the last verses I want to discuss. I don't need to read them all. I can just summarize. They're found in chapters 3 and 4, the dialogue that ensues between God and Moses. Remember, up to this point, we know a lot about Moses. He's a person of some physical strength, moral courage. He has compassion. He has empathy. He has caution, but he's also willing to act alone if he's the only one there. And he has curiosity, intellectual curiosity. So God has said, look, Moses, you're the one. I need you to lead the people out of Egypt, to go to Pharaoh, to say, let my people go. You're the person. All right? So what has Moses said? Okay, God, I'm up to it. Let's go? Absolutely not. He interposes one reason after another for why he's not up to this task and why God should choose someone else. First, it is, who am I, and why should Pharaoh listen to me? God responds, don't worry, I will be with you, Moses. Does that solve it for Moses? No. He then says, why should Pharaoh believe me when I say that God appeared to me? God responds by telling him that he will turn Moses' rod into a serpent and that he will make his hand leprous and then remove the leprosy, showing signs and wonders. And if this isn't enough to convince Pharaoh, then God will turn the water of the Nile into blood. That should certainly do it. Moses should be all set. But is he ready? Even that doesn't convince Moshe to agree. He tells God, I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue. Whether Moshe had a speech impediment, a stutter, or he was just not a great orator or very shy, we don't know for sure. But the point is, he doesn't feel he's up to it. At this point, God gets very impatient, and he responds in verse 11. Certainly I will be with thee, and this shall be the token unto thee that I have sent thee. When thou hast brought forth the people out of Egypt, ye shall serve God upon this mountain. But even this doesn't convince Moses, and finally God responds in anger that Moses' brother Aaron, apparently a gifted orator, will assist him. So what does all this show about Moshe? Obviously he's not an arrogant person. He has a sense of humility. This might be the most important trait in a leader. You want someone who does not believe that he or she knows everything and won't take advice, listen to others, and won't change course if the facts warrant doing so. I know a lot about this because I happen to have a job where everyone defers to me. It's pretty easy to get a swelled head in that situation. I like to say that I'm an ordinary person with an extraordinary job, and I think that's the quality Moshe is showing in this interchange with God. So, in a few short stories, a handful of verses, the text of Shemot gives us a great deal of insight into Moses' character and illustrates why God chooses him for perhaps the hardest and most important task in our people's history. And while no one today would be expected to emulate Moshe or to be the kind of leader he was, we certainly look for some of these characteristics when we choose a leader in the private or the public sector. First, we want the right balance of courage and caution. Second, we certainly want someone with an innate sense of fairness and justice. We want someone who has empathy and compassion, who can put themselves in someone's shoes. We want someone who has the willingness to act when there was no one else to do so, the courage to stand alone if necessary and to do something that's hard and unpopular. We want someone with intellectual curiosity, who has a willingness to learn as much as possible before acting, make sure he or she has the facts before acting. And perhaps most importantly, someone with a sense of humility, a willingness to take suggestion and insight, direction from others. Thank you very much for listening, and Chag Sameach.